Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday. The sun is shining. It's not quite as cold as it was this weekend, so I think this is a sign for a good week. Thank you so much for joining our call for community solutions hosted by the Forbes Funds. Before jumping into my usual spiel and kind of updates, I want to thank Craig for coming back for a part two of this conversation. I think a lot of the folks who are joining the call either watched the YouTube video that we posted as a recap from December, or were even able to attend his part one for transforming burnout in permacrisis presentation last year. And I just want to kind of do a quick recap of some of the high points of that presentation because I personally found it really helpful and transformative. And I know we use that word a lot at the Forbes Funds, but really thinking about what is the definition of a crisis? What is what are some of the pain points around types of fatigue we face in our lives and how that impacts our work? And then more broadly, how that among a lot of people can affect organizational culture. And so among all these things that are changing in the world, internally, externally, there's just a lot to balance. And so again, on the heels of the summit, talking about emotional hygiene and really focusing on mental health as a priority for our advocacy agenda, it really makes sense to kick off our year and have conversations in January that are going to ground our expectations and way of working for the rest of the year. And with it being an election year, I remember, I think it was Erica Petach from Blind Vision Rehabilitation Center last year when we were talking about, what is it that makes successful public policy and advocacy? And what Erica had shared was, persistence. And if that's the ingredient, and we have to have the energy to be persistent in our work and persistent in our advocacy, sometimes that takes a lot. So all that to say, I'm going to start sharing my screen and jump into the presentation. Thank you again, Craig, for joining us this morning, for continuing the conversation, and for grounding us this year. I'm going to start with our quick intro if slideshow wants to cooperate for me. Okay. So Fred will join us at the end of the call this morning. We have hosted over 5,000 calls and over 42,000 participants since March of 2020 when these calls started. And while they originated in a ad hoc, kind of crisis of funding opportunity and availability in the midst of a public health crisis and a racial reckoning within our country, these calls have transformed into a call and response where we poll and survey members of our community and figure out what everyone would like to hear, and engage in a dialogue with subject matter experts throughout the year, each Monday morning, and can join, in a very come as you are kind of way, whether you're just listening in or able to engage with us and put messages in the chat and ask questions of our speakers. We appreciate your time and attention nonetheless. Craig, again, is our guest this morning as a follow-up to our call last year. And I think, grounding this transformation of burnout conversation and the sustainable development goals. Craig, I know, we talked at the beginning of the call about how there's a lot of different applications. Do you want to share kind of in the Forbes Funds UNSDG language how burnout really applies to some of these?
Well, I mean, well, first of all, thank you, Emily, for having me here. It's wonderful. I really enjoyed being with everyone in December. I'm glad to be back, and I found the conversation last time to be really helpful. And actually, as we'll see, it generates some of it influences some of the ideas that I'm talking about here. But what I said last time, I really think still holds, and that is the question of burnout and how we're going to be transforming burnout into something different than what it is. I mean, that touches everything that we do, because if we are burned out, if we are exhausted, if we are detached, if we're cynical, if we're spending our days in overwhelm, we're not going to be able to do any of these sustainable development goals. So this is something that cuts across all of this. And that's my answer. And the same thing with these with the goals that we have here about the neighborhood and improving healthcare and so forth. I mean, we are in a time of such extraordinary change, extraordinary uncertainty. Again, it's, I'll talk about later today, the ingredients of chronic stress are lack of information, uncertainty, conflict, and lack of control. And the more that we're exposed to that, the more stress we're going to be feeling, and the less able we're able to process and complete and release that stress, the more burned out we're going to be,
Yeah.
and the less able we'll be able to do any of this work.
Yeah. And especially, I mean, in the nonprofit sector, I think around a lot of, at least the public policy calls, we talk about nonprofits really being the gap coverage and that social safety net for a lot of individuals in our community. And even when it comes to employment, operating like a business, but being treated like a nonprofit is a really difficult area of uncertainty for a lot of organizations who are, navigating funding changes this year, as there have been so many strategic plan changes among foundations and government coming to an end. So all of this to, again, just put into context, different types of crises that I've heard from members, that we've heard from partners, in recent months, especially. So again, in case you haven't, or you weren't able to join the December call, Craig is a founder and CEO of his own consulting firm. He's a longtime consultant of the Forbes Funds and a friend to us. He helps mission-led leaders experiencing burnout reclaim their lives so they can renew their passion and drive in an uncertain world. His coaching and training programs create supportive spaces where leaders can reflect, plan, and grow outside the pressures of their daily grind. In the process, he helps them reconnect with their purpose, body, relationships, and work so they can lead more effectively in a complex and changing marketplace. If that doesn't sum up 2020 to now, I don't know what does. So thank you again, Craig. I'll stop sharing and allow you to jump right into your presentation.
All right, beautiful. Thank you. And I will share the screen. There we go. And yeah, beautiful. All right, so here we are, transforming burnout and permacrisis. And also let me minimize some of that. All right, so here we are. And also actually, Emily, as we're talking, if some questions come up in the chat and so forth, we'll be using the chat just to get in just to take the temperature of the room, hear some things from folks. If people are asking questions, if something comes up for you, please feel free to interrupt me, and I'll actually open up the chat window here too.
While you're doing that, Craig, can I invite folks to put their name and their organization in the chat just to kind of say like who's here this morning? And start there as far as the engagement. I find that when I do that, usually more questions come through, and this is definitely something where I want folks to ask a lot of questions.
All right, beautiful. Okay, great. So I will proceed then. So what are we going to be about today? So we are going to be about two things. We're going to be giving a recap of what we talked about last time, and then we'll be giving the more of the so what or what next part of the presentation that I really drew from a lot of the feedback that I received at the last presentation to create. So two halves to the presentation today. So what did we do last time? First of all, what is burnout? What are we talking about with burnout? And as we talked about last time, this definition comes from the work of a psychologist named Christina Maslach. Her book, Burnout, The Cost of Caring. It's a really wonderful book. And she argues that burnout is a state of depletion that arises because of chronic stress that comes from a mismatch between us and our environment. That sounds so clinical, but just imagine having to walk, 100 miles in shoes that don't fit. Right? What happens to your feet, right? That's really what she's talking about here. Burnout is just a state of chronic stress. This chronic friction between you and your environment that just wears you out and wears you down. And particularly people who care for people. So healthcare workers, teachers, psychotherapists, social workers, they're the ones that are exposed most to these kinds of chronic stress. These are the people that that the folks here on this call are in. This is you, right? This is your work in the nonprofit sector. And if you're working in human services, you're you're encountering this on a daily basis. And so it's really important to take into account. Um, what is again as I said before, the level of stress we feel depends on again the level of information we have available, the level of uncertainty that we're experiencing, the conflict that's around us, and the powerlessness we feel. This actually comes from if you're familiar with Gabor Mate, the physician who's written some really excellent books. One of his books is When the Body Says No, where he talks about what chronic stress does to us. It does to us physically, and all of the illnesses, both mental and physical, that arise when we are put in stressful environments and can't release that stress. And so and again, when we do not or cannot or are prohibited from noticing and completing the stress, temporary stress becomes chronic, right? That's the issue for us. You can imagine sort of a cycle here where we're stressed out and then we're able to release that stress, right? A certain cycle that is that the energy that we're experiencing, we can let it go. What happens when we can't let that go? It stays within us, and it arises in a lot of different symptoms. And um, over time, we move into a continuum of burnout. There's three different stages that Maslow talks about. It's a state of exhaustion. That's where we start. That's bus stop one is exhaustion, this feeling of overwhelm, of overload, of overextension. That is, we're feeling just worn out by our daily grind. That's bad. But then what happens is that over time, if we can't do anything about that, or if we continue to push through that, we become depersonalized. We close off from our work. We become our capacity to empathize with other people or with ourselves becomes reduced. We end up acting out with contempt toward other people. We end up snapping at other people. It invades how we engage other people and ourselves. And then what happens is we end up stage three is cynicism, where we turn the contempt that we were pushing outward in the personalization phase, we start to turn that inward. So we become inwardly rejecting. We start to feel worthless or ineffectual. We give up. We just check out. Or even worse, we stay in place and just become cynical, bitter people. Right? That's what happens that's the burnout continuum. Um, and this has lots of and that's something that is important, anytime, 20, 30 years ago, um or 50 years ago, burnout was with us, but now it's even more important because of, as Emily was talking about at the very beginning of the hour, this is the world that we live in. We are in a world of what's called permacrisis. And basically, permacrisis means it's a permanent crisis. It's a permanent state of crisis in which we are, as leaders, as individuals, we are in a constant state of volatility. They were talking about, this uncertainty, this high level of conflict, the ambiguity. It's all around us. It's seeping into everything, and it's just exhausting. It is an exhausting time to be a leader in the sector. It's to work in the sector. It's really an exhausting time just to be, an aware, active person in the world. But the thing that's important, and I want to touch on this, is that burnout, as the way that Maslach is talking about, and I think also the way that maybe Gabor Mate would talk about, others are talking about, is burnout is a structural thing. It's not an individual failing. Often when we are feeling burned out, we tend to blame ourselves for that, especially for people if you're working in the service sector. It's you're there, you want to serve other people, and you feel just tremendous guilt, right? Because you can't fix all the problems. That's really that's maybe for some of you, that's why you get up in the morning, right? And so we think that it's about us. It's about, we're not resilient enough, right? We're not able to prioritize better, set better boundaries. Well, yeah, I mean, there's some things that you can do better, but this is a structural issue, right? And so one of the things I always like to say is that burnout is a sign that something is wrong, but what's wrong is not, it's not with us, right? We're not the things that's wrong here. We are in a space that we are asked to assimilate things and do things and respond at such a tempo that I mean, this is at such a tempo for such a long period of time. This is beyond what we are capable of doing, just as human beings, right? I mean, and if we were just to make that ad, admission, if we were just to say that, what does that mean, right? Because that's true, right? I mean, we're in hard times, and we need to be able to say what's true, right? That's one of the things that we're going to be talking about later on. I want to talk a little bit about some of the questions, because there's some really great questions that arose from our discussion. One is, how do we handle the elephant, which is racism, sexism, classism that's in the room, right? Because we know when we think intersectionally, right, that there's going to be some folks who are going to be exposed to just burn out in ways that are different than other folks, right? The stressors on people, the pressures that are placed on people are going to be different depending on where they land, right? And we need to know that. We need to recognize and acknowledge that. Another really great question is, who is responsible for addressing burnout, which is really important, right? As a leader, if there's burnout, if you're seeing people in the organization who are burned out, whose responsibility is it to fix it? And the answer, I would argue, is it probably is you, right? We can't rely on, again, people who are already working 12 different jobs to have a 13th job of addressing and fixing the burnout problem in your organization, right? How do I figure out what's happening with the rest of the staff if they don't feel comfortable? Big question. Yeah. How do we listen and have those conversations, and what resources are available, right? I want to get into that too. Um, and then another one, this one came from at the end of the conversation, where how do we move from the practical, from the theoretical to the practical, from the transactional to transformational or transformative leadership? How do we do that, make that move? Right? How do we deal with crisis, and what does more effective collaboration look like, right? And I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to get to that for the end of our conversation too. Okay, so that is the recap of what we did last time. And what I want to ask you first, and I want to go out in the chat, is this: when we're thinking about burnout within your work, and this could be either the burnout that you yourself could be experiencing, or maybe you're looking in your organization, you're seeing, wow, there's a lot of burnout around me. How do I fix it? I'm curious, and in the chat, I'm curious, what does better look like for you when it comes to burnout? Enacting agency. Thank you, Robert. Peace. Sabbath. Everyone experienced a version of Sabbath. Work-life balance. Being able to respond versus react. And holding space. Breathe. Boundaries. Wow, mitigate. Yeah, yeah. Stepping away. Yeah, boundaries. Yeah, good. Anything else? Okay, wonderful. Yeah. So let's go on. Yeah, trusting your inner voice. That's the and just the spirit of trust. Yeah, vital. Oh, hi, Aaron. Yes, I recognize you. Yes, former student. Anyway, yeah. Um, okay, good. Being okay, feeling not everything is an emergency. It needs to be, yeah, rest and no fear of resting. Mhm. And celebrate success. It's savoring success. Yeah. Beautiful. All right. Thank you. Let's let's move on. Okay, so this is the roadmap I want to talk about today. And again, it's going to look like a process because we're going to be moving through steps, but this is more like a roadmap that I want to imagine. There's like three different zones that might overlap with each other, three different domains. And the rationale comes from this perspective, because if chronic stress and burnout comes from a lack of information, uncertainty, conflict, and a lack of control, then then if we're going to find a way to reverse that, somehow we need to address all four of those issues. So to come out of burnout, I'm going to say three things. We need to find ways to listen. We need to find ways to learn, and we need to find ways to lead, right? So those are the three different zones that I want to explore with you today. And so listening, what does that mean? And this gets back to that question, what resources are available? And the answer that I would have that question is that when it comes to resources, you are the resource. You and the people around you are the resources when we're thinking about burnout. All right. So transforming burnout starts with you as a leader. What you do, your own practice of leadership is vital. How you lead yourself and how you lead other people. And again, as I said before, burnout is a sign that something is wrong, right? And so what we need to be able to do as leaders, as individuals, is we need to be able to learn how to read those signs. And we learn to read those signs by learning to listen to our emotions, our bodies, our relationships, our organization. What is going on around us and inside of us? How do we do that? Right? And if that sounds a little woo-woo, because it might sound a little woo-woo to some folks, I want to have a practical example of that. And this actually comes from a coach by the name of Jerry Colonna. He has an organization called Reboot. And this is a really interesting exercise. It's called the green, red, yellow exercise. And just imagine yourself, in front of a traffic light that reads where you are at a given moment, right? And so if you're green, that means you are relaxed, you're engaged, you are connected, you are good to go, right? Everything's all right with the world, right? You are ready to go. But then there are other modes that we can be in, right? We can move into a red mode, right? Which is you are overwhelmed, angry, stressed out. Somehow you're just not functional. You might be scared. You might be dealing with emotions that are challenging for you at that particular time. You're overworked. You're exhausted. You're cynical, right? you're in the red zone. And then the yellow zone it's a little bit different. It's like the where you're in between green and red. Either you don't know where you stand, right? Because it could be confusing for you right now, or it could go either way. When we think about, how you got here today, right? When you think about, that first cup of coffee in the morning, right? Don't talk to me before I have my first cup of coffee, right? You want that first cup of coffee moves you from your red zone to your green zone, right? Or you're fighting traffic on the way into work today. It's a little bit stressful. You get into work, you might be in yellow, right? We want to be able to know these things about themselves. So there's some questions I have for you. First of all, how easy is it for you to be able to answer that question? If I were to ask you where you are right now, are you in green? Are you in red? Are you in yellow? Right? That's question one. The question two is, if you are able to answer that question, how willing are you? How open are you to acknowledging that and doing something about it? Right? If you are feeling really overwhelmed, do you push through? Right? If you're exhausted, do you force yourself through? Right? If you're in yellow, do you just like barge on forward, mind over matter, or do you take care of yourself? Right? And then a question beyond that is, um, as an organization, as a leader, how often you might be able to you feel comfortable asking other people this question? How comfortable are people telling you where they are, what their temperature is, right? Where they fall on this scale, right? This is the list thing that I'm talking about, right? Because if burnout comes from just pushing on through, barreling ahead, willy-nilly, right? We need to be able to slow ourselves down, right? Understand and be accepting of the fact that maybe we need to cut this meeting short, right? Or maybe I shouldn't be in this meeting at all right now, right? And we need to have organizations that acknowledge that give people the space to get ready, right? So that's something that's important to recognize here. That's the listening that I'm talking about, all right? So when we're listening in this way, we're gathering a heck of a lot of information, right? If we're knowing that if the pace of our organization is putting us into the red more often than not, that's something, right? If there's certain topics in the organization that I'm experiencing as red over green, right? That's also really important information to know. And not that we shouldn't be having those conversations or doing these things, but it gives us an idea of our stress levels and what might be triggering our stress, right? That's what we're talking about listening. And once we get good at listening, then we get to learn. And this is where we start meeting the elephants in the room, right? This is where we start thinking about the areas where we might need to be changing. And this list here, People Practices Purpose, this comes from a group in Seattle, the Center for Transforming Engagement, that do a lot of work on burnout as well. This is, I think, a really interesting set of questions where they say, again, we want to be thinking about the people in our lives. How strong are our connections? How strong is our support network? And that's thinking about it individually, but thinking about this organizationally, we might be thinking about what's the climate, the relational climate within the organization? Is it supportive? Is it healthy? Right? Do people feel connected with each other? Right? Do people enjoy being with each other? Right? These are important things we need to learn. Our practices, how healthy are our habits? Again, do you push through even when you know you shouldn't be, right? a whole bunch of things again around setting boundaries around things. And but again, even there too, our ability to set boundaries also depends on our level of safety in the organization, if or in life. If it's really hard to set a boundary when we don't feel safe, right? So again, this is about learning without judgment either, right? How much work we assimilate. What are the sorts of deadlines we think about with work? How quickly do we assume something needs to be turned around? Hmm? Right? These are things we need to really interrogate and explore. And then the third area is purpose, right? Because purpose is really important, especially for the work that we're doing in the sector, right? In the nonprofit sector, we are doing this work because we have a strong sense of purpose. But the question is, whom or what are we truly serving? One of the things that's really important, again, we can be feeling burnout, but the question is, what type of organization are we working in? I was listening to a podcast from the Center for Transforming Engagement. It's a couple. They had a I was listening to this a couple weeks ago, and they had a guest saying that, if I am working for an organization, I'm burned out, but my burnout is coming because I am trying to keep an unjust system afloat, right? That's very different than the burnout that I might be feeling if um, I am trying to serve the good, right? Yeah, I'm looking here too. Interesting. Is it are the this is I didn't sorry, Emily, I didn't see this. But the time limited coming back to here about the oh, that's the other way, the other direction. There we go. This was it possibly all three and absolutely yes. That's a great question, Emily. Thank you for that. Red, green, yellow, we're taking our temperature all the time because different things can move us from one to the other. It is absolutely possible to be in red, green, yellow multiple times during a day. Yes. And we have to be equally sensitive to ourselves, what's and compassionate with ourselves when that happens, right? If we're noticing we're getting into red, holy smokes, right? We got to know that, right? And so it's that ongoing listening is really important because that's also going to help you learn this, right? To meet the elephants that you're needing to read and to or meet the elephants you're needing to meet, right? Um, really important. Um, so in a way, these first two steps are a lot about gathering information, right? In the listening, we're taking our own the temperature within our own person. And then we're based on that information, we're able to gather more information and see what's working and what doesn't. What sorts of changes do we really need to make? If I'm socially isolated, right? Or if I'm in an organization where everyone is isolated from each other, that's telling me something. If my practices involve my never turning off my phone and responding to emails and texts 24/7, that's a practice I might need to change, right? If my purpose is flagging in some ways, right? If I'm realizing that the purpose I thought I was serving is not really what I'm actually serving, again, that's something we need to change and we need to think about, right? So we gather that information, and then that creates a foundation for our leadership, our learning. And this is where we're moving from the transaction to the transformation, that the different types of leadership styles. And again, I'm breaking this down to three categories: truth, compassion, and power, right? Because again, if we are in a world that is uncertain, we need to be comfortable saying the truth about what's going on around us, right? Or what's going on with ourselves, right? Saying the truth, because the truth will set you free, right? That's the first one. If we are living in a world of conflict, we reply to conflict with compassion. How do we treat ourselves and others with compassionate curiosity? Right? Oh, that's interesting, right? When we think about something arises, right? How do we learn that discipline of compassion? Hmm? And then the third component is power, right? Because lack of control, if lack of control is something that moves us into an area of chronic stress, where do we have the power to make change? Right. I mean, this happens a lot in coaching, where you might be talking with somebody and somebody says, I really feel like I'm completely powerless in this situation. I don't know what to do. And and my question when I asked is, okay, well, that's important to recognize, but where might you have power right now? Because you're not completely powerless, right? Where's your power? And how can you begin to use that to make the change that you need to make, right? So those are the three elements. We're listening to ourselves and others. We're then using that information to learn about the people around us, the practices that we have, and the purpose that we direct our lives toward fulfilling. And then we learn to take all that information to lead in a way that says the truth, that is compassionate to ourselves and others, and that recognizes the power. Yeah, yeah. So let's see. Hmm. Yeah, I got an email through a direct message here. Just it looks like just to me. It says our ability to identify when we're under stress becomes dulled as we're under stress all the time. It becomes normal. This person has post-traumatic stress disorder, and I'm using Whoop to actually see the strain on a timeline of a day. Wow, so I can see when my body is actually under stress, even though at times I don't consciously feel under stress. Great devices to help that are out there to help us give that information that we need. So Whoop is, yeah, I'm not familiar with Whoop. I'll have to check that out. But again, what's really important there in this comment is first of all, saying the truth. Yeah, man, I have post-traumatic stress disorder, right? I'm under stress constantly, right? That's saying the truth. And then developing a practice in which I'm learning how to listen to myself. I'm using this application, this technology to chart where my stress goes up and down during a day. What's going on around me when I'm moving into red, right? What might be triggering me? How can I pull myself out of that, right? These are questions that we really need to know and understand, right? And again, if you can do this for yourself, you can begin to do this for the people who are around you, right? And that's what's making you into a leader that can begin to lead in these times, right? And again, that's the thing that's so important here. When we think about burnout, right? We see burnout as a personal failing. If we see that as burnout as a personal failing, then we're going to be blaming ourselves. It's going to be our fault that we're this way, right? Whereas if we see burnout as a sign, a burnout becomes an invitation to work and lead differently. It opens something for us, right? And so what we need to do is we need to be listening. What is burnout? What is these feelings of exhaustion, of depletion, that cynical voice that comes out in me? What might that be telling me that's going on? Right? Because if we can do that, we can change. And I think that's the thing that's interesting. I mean, burnout is miserable, but again, burnout is a massive problem. It's there, but it's something that it can lead us to understanding and grappling with a deeper problem, right? And if we can use it to do that way, if we can use it to create change, we can really do some really interesting, wonderful things, right? And that's the message that I want to be leading folks with. Yeah. Oh, important. Another interesting. A couple other some things here. Like that just came in. Another question, another thing. Um, this is Rebecca says this in my coaching consulting. Executive leaders report that their board actually affirms values like truth and compassion regarding reports of burnout, yet their leaders hardly support that truth. Jobs become in jeopardy. Yeah, boards of directors, and again, I think but actually, it's interesting too, El, when you write that boards of directors start looking for someone with greater capacity, right? Oh, isn't that horrible, right? This is the problem, isn't it? This is horrible. And again, but it's also interesting too when we think about the BODs, right? How it affects our body too. I mean, it's really but that's really important. It's they we what are we actually affirming? Truth and compassion, and yet the 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 burnout is not met with compassion, right? And again, that's cynicism producing, isn't it? Yes. It is tremendously cynicism producing. Yeah, difficult. That's part of the challenge. That's a structural challenge, right? And and as Sherry said, she says, I feel challenged to recognize that what causes stress in me may not cause stress in others, and vice versa, right? And to not to dismiss what's happening to a colleague or friend, rather be curious about that and help others myself. That is so vital, is it not? Thank you for sharing that, right? We feel challenged to do that. We have to recognize that again, I might be in green on an issue, but everyone around me might be in red, right? Right? Um, right? It's so important to be curious about that, to have a place where people can feel heard, especially in the type of work in human services work where you are the safety net to some incredibly vulnerable people having incredibly complex problems, right? How important that is, right? Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, important to know. We really do need to have that challenge. So I'm curious. This is what's your big takeaway from today, or also what questions might be having, and maybe we can. We have a couple more minutes, so we have some time. Yeah. So what questions might be coming up for folks?
I think one thing that has come up a few times in the chat that I just want to go back to is that fear piece. And
Mm,
so it's not just from a place of PTSD necessarily, but almost like I think a few times I've heard it referred to as like analysis paralysis, right? But what if it's not analysis paralysis? What it is literally just that feeling of paralysis or fear to move in a specific direction, given that uncertainty, right?
yes, I think it's true, right? And again, that fear, like one of the things that's important, there's the fight, flight, freeze response, right? When you are overwhelmed and when you're frightened, many of us, it's deer in the headlights, right? Look, right? You were there and you freeze, right? And it's so important to recognize, and again, that I think, there's so much in us where we say, oh my gosh, why didn't I speak up? Right? Why can't I do that? I must, and it really gets at the structural issues to burnout, right? I often talk with I have a lot of coaching clients who come to me. They're not necessarily dealing with burnout per se, but they're dealing with lack of confidence, right? I'm not confident on my team, right? And I've often had the confidence being like a kind of a weapon used against them, right? Where you're not confident, right? As if it's a personal failing. But in reality, confidence, burnout, so many of these are structural things, right? Because if your team is toxic, it is actually it actually is perfectly reasonable that you would not feel confident speaking up in a meeting, right? You know? So yeah, it's important. Yeah. Let's see, Michelle, you say in an organization, how can you address burnout from the bottom up instead of the top down? Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, because and actually I think it's interesting too, because physiologically burnout is a bottom up thing, right? It comes from your body, right? And then your body is registering all this stress that your mind might not be fully able to process until suddenly your body is saying, I can't take it anymore, right? So again, that's really interesting. How can it, and I think what's important, I think, is, well, maybe one thing to there could be two things here. One is recognizing if you are a leader within an organization and you're recognizing this doesn't feel good here, right? You're able to yourself acknowledge the stress that you're carrying. You can make it safer for other people to talk about their stress, right? If you can be compassionate about the stress that you're feeling with yourself, you can, and you extend that to other people, they might be able to reciprocate. I think that's the problem. And it gets back to what Emily, what you were talking about, and Rebecca, you named also the fear. Actually, you named first, Rebecca. You named that first, and then Emily reiterated that the fear, right? The fear that permeates all of our organizational structures, our organizational lives, right? Um, Again, I listen to podcasts a lot on leadership, and there's so much conversation around, alignment and fit in the organizational development, the literature, right? Where we are trying to get everyone to align with each other, align with the mission. And that's important. But, there's something about that to me that just feels so aggressive, right? Because if I don't align, if I don't, then I'm done here, right? There's threat that's there. There's no voice or choice in that space.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Craig, just jumping in, it seems that when we affirm the things that you are saying
Yeah.
and talk to others who have a vested interest in our work, then what happens, the cure for burnout is, okay, don't do all of that, but still do this piece. And it's like
Mhm.
everybody's still saying,
Mhm.
well, don't do all that over there, but still do this piece. And so that becomes it becomes complex.
Yeah, it's an extremely complex problem, right? And again, thinking about that, Rebecca, it's like how, again, it's easy to see why it all falls down on you, right? Because it's too hard, or maybe there's too many vested interests in play, right? For the powers that be to make this actual structural changes to make. But the issue, but that's why it's so important to call out the structural challenges here. I mean, the same thing when last time when we were talking about of race in this, the race and racism, and how, again, Black and brown folks in organizations, they're doing a lot more interpersonal, very complex interpersonal work, right? In these spaces. And again, yeah, how do we name that, right? How do we begin to make the changes there? It's really important. It's extremely complex and very tricky. But also, this is why, there's a lot of really interesting work to be done here. But I think that if we can find a way to do that, to have those conversations and create different types of organizational models, different ways of working, then I think that's going to release um, a lot more energy, a lot more power, a lot more creativity. I mean, I mean, maybe I'm ending as an idealist there, which is different for me because I'm not an idealist. But, I'm just kind of wondering, yeah. Yeah, is it possible to grow a fearless organizational culture? Hmm. Yeah. That's an interesting that's a really interesting question too, Elwin. Thank you for that. I mean, actually there's a guy, a scholar down at Emory University on the Fearless Dialogues. Oh my gosh, his name escapes me. I don't know if anyone would know that. Oh goodness, Gregory Ellison. There you go. It came from there. Gregory Ellison actually has he talks about fearless dialogues around race. Yeah. Hmm. Oh, different ways of working start sounding like excuses to underperform to supervisors. Exactly. And which is why I think it's so important for supervisors, right? This is where if people are too, if you're realizing that people are too scared, right? They're not reporting to you their burnout, right? Where does that lie? Where does the responsibility lie? And the responsibility to lie is it lies with you, right? Right? If you're a supervisor and people are too scared to tell you about their burnout, yeah, it's important. Yeah, Emily.
So one thing that we talked about last year, very briefly, but I think it was before your call, was nonprofit organizations feeling an added stress because they don't necessarily have space to fail. Where with business ventures, there's that expected, it's like a language where it's like, you learn through failure. If you don't take risks,
Um,
you don't fail, then you don't learn. But with nonprofits, that means that you don't get funding again. That means that you have different donors. That means you have to keep going after these things that, dip into your capacity. Um, and so I think the biggest, having space to fail, but also having like a trusted support system. It's kind of a baseline of uncertainty on top of all these other items that are just added onto that. And I wanted to add that to the conversation because I don't think we ever really dove into that last year. It was just kind of mentioned.
and that's really important. Yeah, the space to fail, right? And again, there are elements there too, because again, when we're thinking about um, or executive directors who might be people of color and organizations that might disproportionately serve people of color, you have less space to fail, right? Whereas if you're, a tech bro in Silicon Valley, right, you can have 30 failures before you're 25 and no one cares, right? And so yeah, the space to fail is really important. But again, this gets back to these deeper structural issues about the way the foundation community works, right? And the type of support and the type of funding models that we have within the field. Yeah, it's really important. Yeah.
And I think that was the end of the comments that came through the chat to me. I was looking through things that might have been direct messages early before, but I think that was all the questions that came through.
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
have any, I was gonna say like kind of closing remarks on that? I know I have to switch to the public policy update in just a second, but I don't wanna.
No, I mean the only thing to say is this is the beginning of a conversation. So folks, I want to talk with you, right? I would like to talk with you just to see where people are, right? So if there's one thing that I would say is, that's my email address, Craig. It's really hard. It's Craig at craigmeyer.com, right? You're there. You can please send me an email. I'd love to chat, see where you are, and learn more about where people are, what people are coming from, what people are dealing with. Yeah.
Would it be helpful? I know in the survey it references kind of like as a prep for today's conversation, but I'm wondering if some of the questions that you ask in the survey that you launched at the end of last year would still be relevant if we want to, kick that link out again. I can put it in
If,
the
if,
chat.
if you want to kick yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, if you want, if there's a survey, if you want that to go, yeah, we can definitely send out that Google survey, if you have a moment, or if you don't, and part of that survey, you can actually say that you want to talk with me. That's there too. But if you're pressed for time, if you're in yellow and you don't, and you're already squished between a gazillion meetings, and doing yet another survey would just, be too much for you. You can just skip it and send me an email.
That is so true. Yes, there's a survey for everything. Yeah. I did get a question directly to me just now. Yes, so these are recorded meetings. I will send out, Craig, is it okay if I send out the link to your slides again as a PDF, like we did
Absolutely.
last month? Okay, perfect.
Yes.
So in our Friday newsletter that goes out, you'll get the recording via YouTube link. We're kind of revamping, thank you, Bree, our YouTube channel for this year, where we have all of the calls for community solutions recorded and uploaded there. The kind of quick summary and slide or links from the call as well for download through the Friday newsletter. Thank you, Bri. I see you put the link in the chat. So I'm going to jump into the public policy update. We have a couple of items that are kind of pressing. So let me jump in to share my screen. Maybe. There we go. Okay, so before I get into the policy items, this one takes a little bit of nuance, so I'm going to talk through it real quick. So the Forbes Funds is partnering with Mad Labs. You may remember Adam Pulisic and Kit Mueller from Summit presentation, but also from our kind of kickoff call for the Call for Community Solutions this year. We're partnering in Q1 of this year to offer 3 AI cohorts and strategic design cohorts. They're designed to help both nonprofit and for-profit organizations and leaders of those organizations design innovative solutions to challenging problems with the support of AI, training AI, and using design theory. And so these are going to be peer learning group cohorts led by Adam and Kit, and then supported by the Forbes Funds as well. And I want to talk through kind of the different levels here in the survey. Yes, we are asking you to fill out another survey, but it's more of an interest form for knowing how to place folks within these cohorts. So cohort 1 is kind of the easiest lift. It's AI assisted, humanity centered strategic design in a box. So you may have seen the link on our website about strategic design in a box. It's basically utilizing strategic design templates virtually and in person. It'll be kind of a hybrid format to solve complex problems within your organization faster. So this is a good cohort for somebody who's, encountering the same things, wanting to dig deeper, but not necessarily, having the resources or capacity to do so. So if you have a very specific problem where you're looking at, deepening your development base or preparing a strategic plan, launching a program, that's something where this is a really good cohort. It'll be hands-on exercises and then kind of the theory of AI to better serve, the populations that you're working with. The second group of cohorts is, Yep, there we go. The second group of cohorts, or cohort 2, is an upskilling and reskilling of leaders within the nonprofit sector, for-profit sector, to become even more effective development directors through AI assistance. So this is an internally facing AI. It's a purpose-built database for donor and funder questions that trains an AI assistant for your organization using, culturally relevant language that you're using individually. So, the Forbes Funds has Skilly. I've trained Skilly on what my voice sounds like versus what Fred's voice sounds like versus what Olivia's voice sounds like. So even if somebody asks us the same question, we would answer it 3 different ways. So training an AI assistant internally to facilitate faster grant making, better partnership discussions, and activating funders and donors in new and exciting ways. So kind of helping your team get on board, again, internally facing, to take those next steps. This is also diving into the brick mindset and being provocative and using challenge-based methods of communicating to utilizing AI. The third cohort is the biggest lift, and this is hiring and training an actual AI development assistant. So this would be externally facing on your website. Same steps in terms of training the AI, but also with it geared towards pulling in new types of engagement. So for our AI, once it's launched externally on our website, people could be able to, prompted to join cohorts and, work with Dr. Hannah. They might be prompted to donate to the Forbes Funds or buy tickets to an upcoming event or, become GPNP members without us having to do that additional outreach. So it's an externally facing AI based on all of the information and training that we're putting into it. And so because that's 3 different levels, I'm going to do a new share into our survey form real quick. Yeah. this is what that survey looks like. And it's important to kind of go through capacity of your organization to dive into some of these things. So there are questions in here of, what sector are you a part of? What's your annual operating budget? The reason that we ask this is because the market value of the AI tool and of this training specifically is about $25,000. Because organizations are partnered with the Forbes Funds, the Mad Labs team and we have worked to move that down to $10,000. And then if there's an additional scholarship that we can offer through the Forbes Funds, for 5,000 or more, that's where, filling out the interest form for the third cohort is really important. So we're still working out final pricing. That's where this last question comes in. If there's something, that's different than what we're thinking on pricing in the cohorts, please respond, let us know, what would be helpful. But it's really important that we get this information on the front end, because these are really exciting cohorts that we're really diving into. Second set of updates here. Let me go back through my slideshow. All right, can everyone see my slides? Hoping this
Yes.
is working. Okay, perfect. So going through events this week, on Thursday, we have a public policy committee meeting from 1 to 2:30. We did cancel it last week because of various weather concerns on Thursday afternoon leading into Friday morning. And so we have conversations. It's more of a roundtable panel discussion on 2024 being an election year and keeping track of the types of resources that are available through League of Women Voters, Jefferson Regional Foundation, Pennsylvania Association of Nonprofit Organizations, Committee of 70, PUMP, GPNP. There's a lot of organizations working in the civic engagement space and working to identify gaps and resources that nonprofits would find helpful. And so just looking at having a conversation with those panelists, understanding who's working on upskilling for voter engagement versus hosting educational sessions on what each candidates' campaign promises or goals are is really important to make sure that we're educating and mobilizing the community. So that'll be the purpose of this upcoming Thursday's meeting, and then we'll have updates throughout the year as we have more engagements. This Friday, and I do see Rebecca on the call. Thank you for joining us this morning. So Reverend Rebecca Guillory Gilmer will be facilitating a discussion this Friday from 9:30 to 11 a.m. at Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. If anybody would like more information on this, please email me directly and I'll forward the calendar invite. Basically, this is a faith-based nonprofit affinity group. We're working to establish a place where faith-based organizations can have open discussions, navigate challenges that are unique to that group. So in addition to, general nonprofit operations, what does that mean to have a, faith-based identity and talk to donors? And there are a lot of different levels there, but so we'll be facilitating a discussion. Dr. Lee from PTS will be offering additional commentary on, external opportunities or kind of conversations that he's been hearing in that space. And I'm asking folks to RSVP by close of business tomorrow because we are going to be providing breakfast for this session. And so just making sure that I have an accurate count for everything is going to be really important. But if you or somebody really, is working to navigate that space of being a faith-based nonprofit, there were 32 folks from the summit who attended that session that really wanted more information. So we're working to give them a place to dive in. And Rebecca, I see your hand up. Please feel free to jump in since you are working to facilitate this.
I just want to thank you and the Forbes Funds for helping this happen. And we're hoping that this is not the only gathering, but that truly something ignites based on the comments that were made after we gathered 60 some or so for the summit breakout. And that's because of the Forbes Funds as well. And so I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. And I appreciate how open you've been about this whole, navigation of what it's going to look like, because it's really important to center that it's not, a single organization or a single faith-based organization of a particular religious or faith-based identity that's leading this. It's more so what type of unique capacity building could GPNP and the Forbes Funds offer this group because of, unique circumstances and the critical role in the community a lot of organizations play. Like not just county-wide, but region-wide for across rural, urban, suburban communities. So That's a really exciting conversation that we're looking forward to starting on Friday. And then a couple of policy items. Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency announced an extended deadline for eligible entities to apply for violence intervention and prevention grant funding. I spoke about these a little bit last year. There were two kind of buckets of funds, and now folks will have until January 31st to apply for the state grants. We'll put the link in the chat with more information. And questions need to be sent by Monday, January 29th, which is next Monday. And there are recordings for 2 webinars that have already been hosted for interested applicants, also available on the PCCD website. So again, the link will be in the chat in just a second. And then the Pennsylvania Department of Aging wanted to send out a reminder that two Medicare beneficiaries, that the Advantage open enrollment period is from January 1st to March 31st. So we're at the beginning of that period, but again, in case folks are having questions, the Pennsylvania Medicare Education and Decision Insight Group, PA-MEDI, is a counseling program, and it's available through local area agencies. You can look on their website to see who's near you, who you might be able to ask some questions. This is no cost Medicare assistance from trained counselors who can walk people through their options throughout the entirety of that open enrollment period. So again, if any organizations are in that space, or if you know of somebody who might be able to qualify, that's a really great resource to have. Thank you to Bree for launching the poll already. Please, if you haven't already completed the poll, please do so. I hope you have a great week, and we look forward to having you join us next Monday, where we'll have a roundtable discussion, to round out our January calls for community solutions before we jump into Black History Month. And we have a series of conversations already scheduled out for February, jumping into historical trends and what we're seeing in 2024 that is really important to pay attention to. So thank you again. I'm going to stop share my screen. And I didn't see Fred jump on. I know he was between meetings at the end of the call. I look forward to seeing you all next week. I'll go ahead and close it out. And thank you so much for joining us this morning.